Hello to everyone, my dear colleagues and our auditory in Facebook and YouTube channels. We are going to talk today with one of my colleagues from other part of the world about elections and COVID pandemic in Asian countries and how these countries are going to organize elections because of these new issues, physical security for voters, for members of electoral commissions, and so on. But today we will discuss generally about Asian tools to protect their voters and their elections, or which countries are going to postpone elections without any excuses. I have a guest. The guest, he's from Asian Network for Free Elections. He is program officer of this network, Amaël Vier. Hello to you.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
And we are partners because my organization from Ukraine is a part of different networks in the European region, and your network is our partner from other parts of the world. My first question will be about Southern Korea, excuse me. Of course, Southern Korea. First of all, how you can assess generally, without many details, why this country decided to organize elections in top period of pandemic issues?
So regarding South Korea, it seems surprising for people who are in other countries, why did they have the election then? But there's a few reasons for that. The first is that the date was decided a long time ago. They decided on the date, I think, more than a year before. So they knew April 15, 2020 was supposed to be an election. Another factor is the fact that South Korea has never postponed an election. Even during the Korean War, they did not postpone. They just went through with it. So in terms of practicality, they really need a huge reason to postpone, and it's not something they usually do. The third reason is that South Korea experienced the COVID-19 pandemic pretty early. In February, it was the first country outside of China to be hit. But the response from the government was so good that they were able to keep control of the pandemic situation in the country. And by the time that the elections got closed, so by March, there was not really a discussion about postponement because people were still able to go outside, people were able to go to work. Right now, there's about 10,000 cases of COVID in South Korea. So 3 weeks ago, it was a lot less. So of course, the fact that the pandemic was under control gave them the opportunity to maintain the election at the same time while trying to make it as safe as possible. So I think my takeaway here is that they did not decide to do the election during COVID-19. They had the election that was planned. COVID-19 happened, and they calculated and they said, we're doing a good enough job that we can keep our election and still keep people safe. And that was a bet that they took. And it seems that they were successful in doing it.
And what tools did they use for protecting or saving voting?
So they used a variety of tools. When you look at pictures, the most impressive are the voters with face masks, with plastic gloves, also with hand sanitizer given at the polling stations, also social distancing. So they were asking voters to keep a minimum of 1 meter between them during the votes. All of that was during election day in polling stations. Apart from that, there was also a lot of initiatives to encourage people to go vote by advance voting. So the week before the election, for 2 days, people all over South Korea could go in advance. So that would limit the number of people going to the polls on election day itself. And this year, election advance voting was very, very successful because 27% of voters in South Korea voted that way. There's also a number of smaller ideas. For instance, they did a small code of conduct for the voters. They released a few weeks before the election to explain this is what's going to happen, this is what you should do, this is what you should not do. And I think that was a very good idea for them to prepare and to really teach people on how do you stay safe during an election.
Okay, and at the same time, we have a huge discussion about values, the value of people's life because of pandemic now, and the values of democracy institutions. That's why I have to ask you, do you know about any Asian countries where a decision to cancel or postpone elections may be based on political reason, not because of safety net?
At the moment, politically motivated postponements, I cannot say that any country in Asia are doing them. Also because it's a fairly light election year in Asia. Most of the national elections happened either in 2019 or 18. And there's, I think, only 5 countries that have national level elections in 2020. So also that leaves potential for the upcoming elections at the end of the year. There's a few of them. Maybe those could be postponed. Right now, Korea proceeded with the election in what I said was a huge bet, but they were successful because at the end they were able to say no person got infected because of the election itself. So that's very impressive. At the moment, there's one country, especially in Asia, that has a very complicated situation, and that is Sri Lanka. That's an island with about 20 million people, and the president dissolved the parliament in March. He has the rights by the constitution to dissolve the parliament, and so he did that. And the law says that elections need to be held so that by the time 3 months after, they have a new parliament. And at the moment, they're stuck because they have an election that was supposed to be in April that now has been postponed to June 20, which is already after the 3 months period. And so it's not exactly in the window, time window that's stated by the law. Some people are disagreeing with that date, so they're trying to do lawsuits to contest it. And some political powers would like to see the election happen, but obviously that is only if it's possible in terms of safety. So Sri Lanka is in a very complicated situation. They don't have a very flexible framework for their own election. And I think flexibility is really something that was an advantage for South Korea that is not the case in other countries. So at the moment, COVID has not been used too much for political purposes. We are monitoring that because we're worried that it might happen more in the future.
Okay, and we have to talk about Singapore and Hong Kong, which are very close to your network, and you know much than we, all of us, about that. So these elections may use new technologies, and these countries have enough money for use the technologies in electoral process. Can you describe somehow, is there any connection between COVID-19 pandemic and decisions as solutions for the voting because of the pandemic to build the social distance between people?
So technology can be a lot of different things. It can mean, for instance, moving the campaign from real life to online. And that's something that has happened in many countries. And I think this year we'll see a lot more campaigning on social media and on the internet because person-to-person interaction will be limited. And that's something that has already started. On the other hand, when you look at the technology for voting, so voting through the internet, it's not something that any country at the moment is looking at in Asia. Some people are calling for it, but there's enough concerns regarding the cost, regarding digital security and fraud, that no countries are seriously considering moving towards electronic voting remotely right now. However, technology in terms of tracking the disease is essential. I am not a health expert, but we know that all of those countries take into consideration the recommendations of health experts. That's an important point. And when you look at Hong Kong, which has elections in September normally, and Singapore which must have election before April of next year. So they have a full year to hold the elections. Those are countries that have started to change their laws, have started to prepare having face masks and sanitation products to be safe. So the technology also in, I would say, in preparing for a pandemic in modern times is there. Voting remains pretty low technology, to be honest. And that's something that has advantages and also inconvenience, of course. You have to consider both sides.
Okay, and what about political advertising and agitation in social media? How it looks like in Asian countries? Do you have any regulators or rules, specific rules for agitation during electoral campaign in social media?
It really depends country by country. Some countries have the resources and have the technology to investigate, for instance, fake news or political advertising on social media. Taiwan and South Korea are both good examples of that. Taiwan had national elections in January, and since then they're also having regular elections. Since then they had 30 local elections during COVID. So everything that I said for South Korea works exactly the same in Taiwan. And they're monitoring the social media with fact checkers to try to take down those posts as early as possible. But it's a very hard work because there's so many fake news going on the internet, and that's not only Asia. I think that's a worldwide phenomenon that we have a problem with in terms of elections. And then you have countries with fewer resources like Myanmar or Sri Lanka that have elections, and the election commissions don't really have the resources, financial or human, to monitor that sufficiently until now. So everyone wants to do a good job about managing social media, but it's very, very difficult. Some countries have fact checkers, other countries do not. Thailand, for instance, has almost no fact checking. The Philippines is very developed. So it's really something you have to see for each country, unfortunately.
Okay, and last question, but not least question, what about your network and your colleagues this region? How are you going to observe? Do you have new protection policies for your observers, or do you have a plan how to observe during this period?
So that's a very good question. So our network, we do international election observation as the network. At the moment, we're waiting on Sri Lanka to either confirm the dates or to postpone the election because we would like to observe the next election in Sri Lanka. We have drafted policies as a network for our international observers so that they would need to wear protective equipment in the field and to maintain social distancing and to maintain proper records for each day of what they do and where they go. However, those policies, we can only say they work if we have the chance to try them in the field. So at the moment, we're waiting to see if we can observe in Sri Lanka. We have a discussion with our member organizations. So those are domestic observers, a bit like OPORA. In 17 Asian countries, we have members that observe elections. And we're talking to them to also help them adopt new policies. The obvious ones being really masks and washing of hands. But it's not always easy. Some countries have poor health equipment, and something that might be easy for the most developed countries in Asia, that are Singapore, Taiwan, or South Korea, could be extremely difficult in some developing nations. So we want to have guidelines to protect people, and at the same time, we don't want to ask too much of countries that are not able to do. So that's one of the reasons why we say that there's nothing wrong with postponing election. It's fine, as long as you do it according to the law, that you explain why you're doing it, so that you have a good enough reason, and that you offer an alternative date or timeline. Postponing election to just say we're taking a time out for democracy, we're very much opposed to that. But we want safe elections. So you have to consider both. And it's a very difficult job, honestly, for those countries that have elections coming up to say, I'm willing to do it, or I have to wait for it. Some countries cannot wait, as I've already said. So I assume you have the same policies.
Of course, we are going to develop our own policy, and we have to develop somehow regulations and electoral law till the next local elections in my country, and include and discover your experience and other countries how to protect elections, voters, and observers at the end. Thank you very much for sharing with us your experience, and have a nice evening, because you have late evening for now.
Yes, thank you very much. Take care.
Bye.
Goodbye.